Welcome to the Uncut Podcast. I'm Pastor Luke.
I'm Pastor Cameron.
And this is the Uncut Podcast, where we have honest, uncut conversations about faith, life, and ministry.
Morning, everyone.
Morning, everyone. At least morning for us. We've been, in the past couple episodes, talking about Sabbath. Kind of covered a little bit of the gamut. Today, we're not entirely sure what exactly we're going to talk about, but we figured we'd start with Sabbath, since that's where our study has kind of been and where we've been kind of thinking and talking about as of late. Maybe kind of finish up some details or questions that we didn't get to talk about in the sermon series. There was a lot to talk about there. But maybe let's just start with that question that I think is on a lot of people's minds and is a heavily debated topic. So there's certainly plenty to talk about, is must Christians observe Sabbath?
If you want to follow the life of Jesus closely, then yes.
Yeah. So your answer is, well, Jesus practiced Sabbath?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's inconsequential.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes a little bit like maybe the argument is a little circular because he comes to be the Lord of the Sabbath, to be the fulfillment of the law.
Yeah.
He is a Jew,
Mm-hmm.
and they celebrated or observed the Sabbath. And so but then in the same way, I guess, like, part of the reasoning would be, or part of the like reverse question is, why would a Christian choose not to celebrate the Sabbath or observe the Sabbath?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the typical answer is, well, I don't have to because I follow Jesus. He is the Lord of the Sabbath. He fulfilled the law
Mm-hmm.
in his life, death, resurrection. So I'm no longer bound by the law. Therefore, Sabbath is no longer something that I have to be worried about, which I've not really ever truly understood that argument myself, because we don't typically have that type of attitude towards other aspects of the law, in particular Old Testament, or like Ten Commandments type of law. Typically, there is still a understanding of, we want to continue to keep the moral aspects of the law because we think that they're important and because Jesus did. But ultimately, I kind of think I understand the question, but I almost think that it may be the wrong question.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than must a Christian follow the Sabbath or observe the Sabbath, I think the better question is, what would be the reasons that a Christian wouldn't observe the Sabbath?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think to give a fair representation of I think it would be like, well, Jesus did away with the law, and like,
Did he though?
well, no. But like, we're no longer bound by the law, perhaps is a better way of saying that.
Mm-hmm.
And, Jesus sort of has given us freedom,
Mm-hmm.
and so for us to continue to hold to what like was a Jewish custom, would be kind of like, isn't that just Judaizing ourselves? So the new church, the early church, struggled with people who were Judaizers, who essentially were advocating for, importing significant amounts of Jewish Levitical law into church practice. And Paul talks very explicitly about the Judaizers and not being subject to that. So why does it not fall in the same vein as circumcision?
And I would say to that, because Sabbath, it was not just a principle of the law, Sabbath was a principle of creation.
Mm-hmm.
That Sabbath wasn't established because God said, oh, and by the way, on the seventh day, don't do anything.
Right.
Or the seventh year, don't do anything.
Yeah.
That Sabbath had its root in creation.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it goes beyond just law keeping or law breaking or the fulfillment of the law. Yeah, because if we talk about Sabbath as something necessary unto salvation, which is what the Judaizers were trying to do, right? They were saying to they were saying to Christians, Gentile Christians, well, Jesus was Jewish, so they were elevating things like circumcision, elevating the necessity of that
Mm-hmm.
for salvation.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't elevate Sabbath as necessary to salvation,
Right.
but that's not the same thing as saying that it is an unhelpful or unnecessary practice, because especially because of the way in which we see the rhythmic, cyclical presence of Sabbath in the creation account.
Mm-hmm. I want to read for us. I think this will kind of help us summarize the whole, but actually both sides of the argument well. Here is Romans 14, verse 5 says, "One person esteems one day as better than another, while another esteems all days alike. Each one should be fully convinced in his own mind. The one who observes the day observes it in honor of the Lord. The one who eats, eats in honor of the Lord, since he gives thanks to God, while the one who abstains, abstains in honor of the Lord and gives thanks to God. For none of us lives to himself, and none of us dies to himself. For if we live to the Lord. If we die to the Lord. So then, whether we live, whether we die, we're the Lord's. For to this end, Christ died and lived again, that he might be both Lord of the dead and the living."
Mm-hmm.
And so, there in that first part, it's talking about one esteems one day as better than the other, while some esteem all days alike. Each should be fully convinced in his own mind.
So we're saying that for Paul, at least, that the practice of Sabbath, and when he doesn't come right out and say
No.
that one day is the Sabbath, but you get the language that he's using,
Yes.
especially when he says, they observe one day unto the Lord, which is the message of the Old Testament about Sabbath.
Right.
That he is saying it's a matter of personal conscience and conviction.
Yeah.
You can if you want to.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to if you don't want to.
Yeah.
But what do you think he was saying that in relation to? Like, do you think it was in relation to a person's salvation? Or do you think it was in relationship to, like, what is... Like, I think it's in relationship to salvation. Like, hey, Romans,
Mm-hmm.
it's a matter of personal conscience here. So, like, you're not going to be unsaved if you don't. You're not going to be saved if you do.
Right.
But I do wonder what Paul would say in the everything is permissible for me, but not everything is beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, but this is beneficial.
Right.
I don't know, but I do wonder, because I just can't get away from its presence in creation.
Yeah. I mean, there's also an argument. It would be, I wonder if there, so I don't know, but like there could be an argument here that he's maybe not saying that we should, well, it would be kind of hard to get around the phrase one esteems all days as alike. But there was some debate early in the church about Sabbath moving from Saturday to Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the early church observed traditional Sabbath on Saturday and then practiced what eventually became our modern church service on Sundays as well. Some people think that accounts for some of the, like, the way that communions are kind of described. There's the kind of the different communions that are described in the New Testament, where it seems like communion was this big feast, but then also it seems to not always be that. And so some think that that's maybe the origin of that, is that we were having Sabbath feasts with communion on Saturday, which would be like our Friday night, and then practicing Sunday morning worship as well. But I don't think that that's really what he's talking about here, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I think he's saying here that while here's the thing, is that if you read this passage and you're like, okay, well, that means I don't have to observe Sabbath, he doesn't really let you off the hook. He says each one should be fully convinced in their own mind. The one who observes the day observes it in honor of the Lord. The one who eats, is to do in the honor of the Lord, he gives thanks. The one who abstains in honor of the Lord gives thanks. So if you're observing all of the days alike, you're supposed to be observing all of those days to the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
With the same amount of intentionality as if you were observing
do the one.
that you would do the one. Mm-hmm. And what I find a compelling kind of rebuttal to anyone who's reads this passage and simply reads it as like, well, there, I don't have to practice Sabbath. Like, okay, then how are you observing every day unto the Lord with intentionality and because you're supposed to be doing that unto the Lord. Whereas what I think what typically happens is we just fall into a pattern of just doing what the world's been doing. Mm-hmm. We just go through our week, our habits, our rhythm is more defined by the sports schedule and our work schedule than it is by observing it.
Our Sabbath rhythm.
Our Sabbath rhythm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But I agree. I think largely, there's this, people make a distinction in the Old Testament law, and like it kind of works, but like, saying that there's the ceremonial and cultural law, which is most of what's in Leviticus. And then there's the moral law, which is summed up in the 10 Commandments. The ceremonial and Levitical law has mostly been done away with. Paul mostly advocates we don't necessarily have to observe that. That's why I had bacon for breakfast this morning. But then the moral law we must continue to observe. That's generally like an argument that has been made by a lot of Christians for a long time. The issue being is that that's a really nice way of dividing it up, except for when you come to the Sabbath, because then people also want to say, well, the moral law except for the Sabbath, because the Sabbath is obviously not moral, except that the Bible does treat it as a moral law. It was a Sabbath breaker could be punished by death in the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm. It's what they wanted to do with Jesus.
They wanted to kill Jesus because he healed on the Sabbath, and other things on the Sabbath. And so it was a moral law. And I think I think if you want, like, I don't know how completely convinced I am by that argument of like the ceremonial and moral. I don't know if that's really a category with like.
Yeah, I was going to ask the question about like, what do you think the awareness of people contemporary to Jesus was in the distinction between ceremonial and moral law?
I don't think it was
just the law.
It was just the law, and I think that's a philosophical like category that we've put on it reading backwards.
It's helped us to read backwards.
It's and like it creates a nice distinction in our minds because it helps us kind of parse out some of what Paul's saying in the New Testament. But I don't know that it originates from the Bible, and so I think it has a pretty strong limit as how far back that can really create our interpretations of
there
things.
Are things that are labeled as ceremonial laws.
Mm-hmm.
but they were never, at least
Well, because like
I could be wrong, but
there was
I don't recall any point where they were like, where any New Testament writer or even Old Testament figure elevated certain laws over other laws
no,
as like, oh, this is the moral law, so we must follow it. This is just the ceremonial law, so that there's some room for interpretation. I could be wrong there, but I don't think that that's the way that they approach the law.
not necessarily. I mean, like you could make the argument that like the punishments, so like the
Yeah.
severity of punishment per law makes. But I mean, most laws ended up in some version of death at some point. If you read the Old Testament, um, so I don't know. I've never really, not never, but I feel like that categorical argument is hard to make from Scripture itself, and I think is more a category that we've reimposed on Scripture post. But I think it. But if you buy that, and if that's like a schema that you're like holding into, you then do have to answer the question, why don't we observe Sabbath? But even if we don't hold on to that schema, I do still think that the fact that it is encoded in the Ten Commandments does root it as being somewhat core. It's not like a law that's buried. It's not like the law of like
Don't eat shellfish.
don't eat shellfish, don't wear blended fabrics, don't the first year of marriage, the man's not allowed to go off to war or leave his homestead for a whole year.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not one of those laws. It's one of the Ten Commandments, rooted in creation and in the Exodus story, reiterated a lot,
Mm-hmm.
tied into the gospel story.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not some small thing for us to dismiss.
Yeah, I just think it becomes more difficult and problematic to explain away the practice of Sabbath than it does to actually observe the Sabbath.
Yeah.
You gotta do more theological, interpretive, hermeneutical gymnastics to jump around.
Yep.
Why wouldn't we? Especially in this is something that you said this past week, especially in a like understanding Sabbath as a gift.
Right.
Like if Sabbath is a gift given to us by God, then who in their right mind would be like, yeah, I'm good on gifts from God. I don't need any gift from God. I don't want a gift from God. I would rather just work myself to death and unite myself with the God of mammon in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of receive a gift of God rooted in the fabric of creation.
Yeah.
So it just seems
it is
silly.
that's the point is essentially we do have to get down to a place of like, well, why are you refusing Sabbath if it's a gift?
Yeah.
And like, maybe there's a listener, you're like, your life and your work and your family is in such a way that like you're working 7 days a week or something ridiculous, like, yeah, is there grace for where you find yourself and what you're forced to do? 100%, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, like, I would say that though the people who literally are unable to observe Sabbath in a 24-hour period of rest from all work and spending it in delight and worship is very few.
Mm-hmm.
I would say most people who would come and say, well, Pastor Luke, Pastor Cameron, I cannot practice Sabbath. I am just simply too busy. I would say that most of those people can. They are simply unwilling to change their life in such a way as to make it possible.
Right. Yeah, and right. And there may be days or weeks.
Yep.
Where my schedule this week is such that like I don't know that I'm going to get a full uninterrupted 24-hour period of time where I can legitimately pursue Sabbath rest.
Mm-hmm.
the difference now being is because Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath, I do not fall under the curse of breaking that law.
Right.
I fall under the law of grace, the law of Jesus, and there is a permissibleness there.
Yep.
Not a taking advantage of the grace offered, but a freedom from the legalism that
Mhm.
says following the law to a T is what makes you righteous.
Yeah.
I already am righteous. I have the righteousness of Jesus,
Mhm.
not a righteousness of my own that comes from the law, so Paul himself says, but a righteousness that comes by faith.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, for me, it's like I'm gonna take the gift. I'm gonna celebrate the gift. If there's weeks that the gift becomes or that the schedule becomes just undoable, then I
Mhm.
take what of the gift I can.
Yeah.
Um, it's when we were preaching on prayer, we use the phrase "pray as you can, not as you can't,"
Right.
and sometimes you need to Sabbath as you can,
Yep.
not as you can't.
Right. Where you start where you're at.
Mhm.
If that looks like, you know, your Saturday morning, you're able to take just Saturday morning as a Sabbath,
Mhm.
start there.
Yep.
If you're like, there's no way I could do a 24-hour period. Okay, well, can you do like a 6-hour period, 8-hour period?
Mhm.
You know, um, let that be, let that be something.
Mhm.
We were finishing up our Wednesday night study on Sabbath last night, and for that curriculum, we've been using the Practicing the Way curriculum on Sabbath by John Mark Comer and his team. And they had a really, I think, helpful way of talking about Sabbath. They said um, that in their community, they've been talking and practicing Sabbath so long that people have kind of developed this slang for something that's Sabbath adjacent, but not truly Sabbath.
Mhm.
So, like a day where you're like, oh, you start out and you're like, but then you get distracted and you do the laundry and you maybe do some project work and you're kind of like, nah, and you kind of not really. And then you end the day with like, binging a whole season of a show
Mhm.
or something like that. They would call that Sab-ish. Sabish, not Sabbath. Um,
Okay.
Sabbath-like.
Yeah.
And I think I think that's a thing that, is a really true experience. I think if we're not careful, um, can become Sabbath-like, very Sabbish, where we're not truly practicing Sabbath with the level of intentionality that it actually brings
Mhm.
life.
Yeah.
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 What do you feel like are those things that like maybe that become part of into Sabbath that make it not as intentional and life-giving,
Yeah.
that kind of like turn it more into a day off
Yeah.
than a true Sabbath?
Well, I will only speak from my experience,
Yeah.
but uh, in the past, I have used my Sabbath as a way to knock things off my to-do list at home,
Mhm.
things that I've been staring at for weeks or months or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's hard because there's a sense of like, oh, when I have the opportunity now to get to one of those things
Mhm.
and knock it off the list, then I'm like, oh, it feels so good to have that done.
Yeah.
A tremendous sense of accomplishment or appreciation or
Yeah.
whatever. But in the midst of doing it, it's just work. It's just like trying to get this thing done. This is my only time, so to speak, that I have to do it. And so I would say like doing home projects and like chunking things or checking things off the list. That's one that's Sabbish for me.
Yeah.
Um, I think exercising is Sabbish for me.
Oh, really?
Yep, I do.
Mhm.
Part of the reason that I think that is because Sabbath in a lot of ways is the breaking of a rhythm.
Mm.
it's like the ceasing and the
Right.
stopping of what your life is.
Mhm.
And a part of my regular rhythm and is exercising
Yeah.
every day. In the morning, usually, sometimes twice a day. Like I was at the gym this morning
Cameron's a gym bro, guys.
at 5 a.m. And before I go, well, maybe. I mean, we have people coming over for dinner, so like I don't know when I'm gonna get to it today, but I have another workout in my program or in my schedule to prepare or to get
Mhm.
ready for the marathon I'm prepping for and
Yeah.
running. And is it necessary to do it? Like, no, it's not necessary. I'm not gonna shrivel up and die if I don't. Like
Yeah.
I'll be all right.
Yeah.
Um, but it's so a part of like who I am that I do get in my head a little bit about if I miss a workout.
Yeah. Which
It,
is good on you,
yeah,
you
I
know.
really get in my head. And so I really push my schedule and push my body to get those things done. Um, and I think that it could be said that on a Sabbath, that like maintaining that rhythm
Mhm.
and maintaining that schedule for me is not a sufficient enough break with the world,
Yeah.
or not a sufficient enough break with the
Your pattern.
culture of my heart.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I feel like we were just talking about home projects before we started recording, but, like, if there's a magical home project that takes an hour, maybe an hour and a half, that could be Sabbath for me, but those just don't exist.
Mhm.
Like, by the time you like, "Okay, what do I gotta do?" Figure out, "Okay, oh, I need to go to Home Depot or wherever, Ace, and get X, Y, and Z to do the project." You come back, start the project, it doesn't take as you're getting interrupted. Oh, there's that thing that "Oh, look, this is gonna be twice as big," projects never end up being simply an hour of your time. Because there is a little bit of truth to, like, the adage of, like, if you work with your mind, rest with your hands, and if you work with
Mhm.
your hands, rest with your mind. There is, like, some truth to that. Um,
What if you do both?
but what if you do both, then
Yeah.
you just lay there.
Sometimes that's what I need. I feel
Yeah,
like even that's what I need today. So,
yeah, but, so for me, sometimes some physical labor, some things around the
mhm.
house, but I know that can easily for me, that can easily turn from, like, a 45-minute project into, "Where did my whole day go?"
Yeah.
And then I don't feel very rested.
Well, I will say too that like there's physical activity that I could probably do that I know I could do that would not be Sabbath, but would be Sabbath. And
Mhm.
I don't know why I didn't think of this when I was talking before, but that's exactly Sherry and I last Friday. We got the kids off to school on the bus and we packed a packed a bag and we went
Mhm.
for a long hike in the Allegheny National Forest. No
Yep.
cell service, beautiful weather, just the two of us. Um, Hiked 6 miles into a lake, hiked back out, like had lunch, and it was physically demanding.
Mhm.
Um, but it wasn't like oh, I'm here
Yeah,
exercising.
you're not lifting rocks in a
No,
smelly warehouse,
no.
like
You're just like I was enjoying the company of my wife. I was enjoying the company
Mhm.
of creation. I was enjoying the company, like the presence of the Lord, out in the fresh air, no pressure,
Yeah.
just there to enjoy,
Yep.
to delight. Stuff like that
Yep.
is what work is like. That could be for me.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think for me, the thing that is most easily I love spending time with people. I think sometimes it depends on where my social battery is
Mhm.
and who the people are sometimes. Um, like if I'm going into a social situation, what's supposed to be my Sabbath, and I'm like, there's going to be a lot of I don't really know the people super well, or their acquaintances, or um, or something. Like, it's going to require more of my social battery.
Mm-hmm.
That does not typically. That's usually more Sabbath-ish. I might even walk away saying, "Oh, that was kind of fun,"
Mm-hmm.
but I don't feel rested. I feel more like a drained Energizer bunny.
Yeah.
Or I think the thing that is more likely to sneak in and steal my Sabbath is like, I need to find language for this because everyone knows what I'm talking about. But I've not quite really found the term for it in English. But kind of this, I think it's when we engage with entertainment in a mindless or overconsumptive way. So like binging a TV show, scrolling on my phone, playing video games for hours on end. Now, like, part of my story and even what I shared from my last sermon was that actually, like, Friday night movies with my dad, sitting down with a bowl of popcorn, watching a classic movie was, like, for me, an early identification of, like, that was Sabbath for me. Like, that was a routine and habit that was in my family that, like, brought a lot of joy, goodness into my life. But that wasn't sitting down and watching, like, a Netflix or Hulu show that's like, 30-minute episodes or 45-minute episodes and watching 6 of them in a row or something like that. It was sitting down, watching something that had been created with, like, some intentionality and artistry, um, and even talking about it, right? And there were some boundaries to it. It wasn't like I was doing that every night. This was something I was doing specially with my dad on Friday nights. And so there is, like, a point for me where, like, playing a video game for an hour or 2 or watching a good movie or something can be really restful, restorative, and bring joy to me. But when it starts to become mindless and I'm using it to escape or numb out, or it, like, gets into this length, it does not. It ceases to becomes Sabbath for me, and I walk away feeling less attuned, not more attuned to my environment and myself. There's like a fine line for that. For some people,
it's a volume.
Yeah, exactly. And for some people, like, you just gotta avoid all digital media. Like, and for me, that's not necessarily the thing. If I because I enjoy watching a really good movie and sitting down and discussing it and thinking about it. But I know that that's not everybody. Kind of drives my wife nuts. We'll be watching like I don't know, some sort of like thriller or something, and she's just like, "Oh my gosh, what if that person dies?" I was like, "I won't. They won't. They're top billed on the they're like the advertised star. They're not going to die in the movie." They're like, "Shut up." I have a tendency of ruining movies for people sometimes, but so I think that I don't know. I think media definitely can get its hooks because that's our default way of relaxing.
Yeah,
But it's not necessarily a good way to Sabbath.
No. No. Yeah, I think the whole series on Sabbath, the press into Sabbath has been timely and from the Lord. I don't think that it is like we just picked a spiritual topic out of thin air. I think it goes from the Lord. I'm kind of eager to continue with it now that there's somewhat of a base or a foundation that's been laid in the church, and see where it goes from here for all of us, even just myself. So
yeah, me too. I do think that we talked about this, I think last time, was just how much the topic kind of surprised us and how much there was to kind of talk about and even just unpack, and how culturally opposed we've become to Sabbath.
Yeah, the pushback, and then really eye-opening and revealing to me as a pastor. So Thanks for listening to this episode and all the previous episodes on Sabbath and prayer and the things that we've been preaching on lately. We're going to be taking a break from a regular series over the next 3 weeks on Sundays, be preaching on Palm Sunday this week, and then Good Friday and Easter Sunday, and then the last week of the month here in April, preaching on baptism, and we have a baptism service coming up. So, and then we're into a series on Exodus. So I imagine that you're going to get a lot of Exodus material here on the podcast during that time. So the spring and summer.
Yep. Or parables.
That's right. Teaching on the parables on Wednesday night. That'd be a great class. So
yeah. So.
Also, I do have to say, someone did, just like off the cuff, out of the blue, had no idea they watched the podcast, said, "Hey, thanks for making your speech a little bit quicker." And then they laughed. Like, all right. Okay, thanks. You're welcome. I'm going to continue to try to speak more quickly, because on replay, recognizing how slowly I speak. But
we'll count it up to thoughtfulness.
Sounds good. All right, thanks. We'll catch you on the next one.